Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something spectral, really. We're looking at your sources on, well, why people believe in ghosts.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, isn't it? And you've gathered quite a collection. We've got poetry, neuroscience, cultural takes, even Japanese history.
Exactly. So the mission here is to kind of pull out the key reasons. What roles do fear and imagination play? How does culture shape it all?
It's about getting beyond just, are they real? And looking at the very real psychology and culture behind the belief itself.
Okay, let's dive right in with Dorothea Lasky's essay. It's called A Belief in Ghosts, Poetry and the Shared Imagination. She doesn't just theorize, she shares personal stuff, seeing a ghost, even communicating with, what was it, a 16th century teenager?
Uh-huh, yeah. And what really got her, apparently, was a student having a really similar vision, this creepy-looking blonde teenager.
Whoa, okay.
So that leads her to this concept she calls a material shared imagination.
Hold on, material. Shared imagination. What exactly does she mean by that? Like it's physically real.
Well, almost. She suggests that imagination isn't just this, private thing in your head. It's something we build together, something shared, especially through art, like poetry. She thinks poetry can create a literal, real space. She even calls it a city called the imagination.
A city?
Yeah. And in that shared space, other worlds, like where ghosts might be, can feel possible, even real.
Ah, okay. So the stories, the poems, they make this space tangible for us collectively.
That's the core insight, yeah. Our collective imagination, when it's fed by these powerful stories, can create a kind of shared reality where the supernatural feels plausible, proof or no proof.
So poetry is like a doorway. She brings up an Alice Notley poem, All My Life, interpreting In This Hell Here With You as referring to this shared space, this community.
Exactly. And belief is crucial. Lasky points out poems have images that carry weight. They make you believe, almost. She quotes Emily Dickinson about belief, keeping believing nimble. It's active.
Nimble belief. I like that. It connects to what Sartre said, right? About
Right.
writers creating visions in a real brain space.
Precisely. It's like the act of writing, of creating, gives these imaginative ideas a kind of solidity.
That's a really powerful idea. And she pulls in more threads, like Jack Spicer saying the dead speak through poets from an outside.
And Octavio Paz, who saw poetry as bridging seeing and believing, making the unreal feel real through this embodied imagination, like poets are tuning into something else.
Wow. And she connects this to her father's experiences with Alzheimer's, seeing relatives who'd passed away.
Right, and she asks, were those just misfirings in the brain, or was he somehow visiting another space? Really blurs those lines, doesn't it?
It really does.
Then there's Yeats and his wife Georgie, who claimed spirits gave them metaphors for his poetry, like helpful ghosts in the poem's imagination.
Generous spirits. It makes you reconsider perception and reality itself.
Totally. And Blake seeing angels in trees as actual physical reality that emphasizes the realness of vision for creativity.
Then there's this idea of bidirectionality of seeing. You look at something, it looks back, changes you, gives weight to vision, to that imaginative space.
Which makes you think about how much our perception actively shapes what we experience as real. Lasky wraps up by suggesting poetry can make the dead alive again in the poem.
Like a kind of immortality through imagination. It really speaks to the power we give stories.
Profound stuff.
Okay, let's pivot now. From imagination to biology. Let's talk about the amygdala, based on the Cleveland Clinic info. This little almond-shaped bit in the brain. It's huge for emotions, especially fear. How does that tie into ghosts?
Well, the amygdala is basically our threat detector, right? It processes emotions, links them to senses, memory, learning, and it's super sensitive to potential danger. So when you encounter something ambiguous, a weird noise, a shadow, it's something you might interpret as ghostly,
Yeah.
your amygdala can light up, trigger that feeling of fear, unease, even if there's no solid proof of a threat.
So our brain's just wired to be cautious, and things we don't understand can set off the alarm?
That's a key takeaway. Ambiguous stuff hits the amygdala's potential threat button, creating a very real feeling of fear.
And it does more than just fear, right? The article mentions aggression, learning, social stuff, memory.
Oh yeah, it's involved in a lot. And its location is interesting near sensory pathways, especially smell. You know how a scent can just trigger a powerful memory or feeling?
Definitely.
The amygdala is doing that work, constantly scanning for things relevant to survival, including vague potential threats.
And conditions like anxiety, PTSD, phobias, they affect the amygdala, which brings up the amygdala hijack.
Right. That's when, in perceived danger, the amygdala just takes over, fight or flight kicks in. Super helpful if a bear's chasing you.
But less helpful if it's triggering off, say, memories or anxieties that make you feel haunted.
Exactly. In PTSD, for example, it can be overactive. That heightened anxiety could definitely make someone more prone to interpreting unknowns as threats, maybe even ghosts.
And damage to it messes with fear response, shows how central it is.
Yeah.
But the article also mentions ways to calm it down: therapy, breathing, stress management.
Which is important. It shows that while the fear response is biological, it's not totally out of our control. We can learn to manage it.
Okay, shifting gears again. Let's look at culture, using that essay from Ball State, Fear Itself, or Fearing Ourselves. It argues fear gets used as a control mechanism, especially in the U.S. What examples do they give?
Well, they point to some pretty heavy historical examples, like Jim Crow laws, arguing they were fueled by a manufactured white fear about losing social status, not actual danger.
Wow.
And similar patterns in how urban danger is depicted, justifications used for police brutality, the war on terror rhetoric.
And more recently, the pandemic.
Yeah, the rise in xenophobia against Asian communities. It's a disturbing look at how fear can be, weaponized for prejudice.
It really is unsettling, but the essay also talks about why we like horror, ghost stories, Ghostbusters, The Conjuring, Hill House. It's not just about scares.
No, the argument is that these stories are actually deeper meditations on culture and the individual. They let us explore things,
Like what?
like past injustices maybe, think Shell Shaker. Or they can offer comfort, like Ethel Rosenberg's ghost in Angels in America. Or they tap into disturbance, personal struggles like in Hill House.
So maybe our fascination with ghost stories is a way to process or even push back against those bigger societal fears.
Could be. And some fictional ghosts do heavy lifting, like Beloved Morrison's novel embodying memory, trauma, disturbance, comfort, all tied to slavery's legacy. Ghosts carry cultural weight.
Definitely. The essay mentions Freud's uncanny, too.
Right, the unheimlich, that feeling of something familiar but also deeply strange. It helps explain why ghosts fascinate us. They're recognizable people, places, but twisted into something unknown, eerie.
And Avery Gordon's idea that ghosts are how lost things make themselves known.
Yeah, that's crucial too. Ghosts can represent trauma, things swept under the rug. They disrupt our sense of peace, blur fantasy and reality.
The piece mentions lots of examples from a journal: hauntings in comics, scars as ghosts, family structures, politics, and horror.
Yeah, it shows how haunting works on so many levels. Personal, cultural, political, even physical.
And the journal itself moves from self to culture and back.
Emphasizing how linked our personal fears and experiences are to the bigger cultural stories and anxieties floating around.
Okay, let's travel now to Japan with the Nippon.com article on souls, spirits, ghosts, the yurei. Its meaning changed a lot.
Hugely. Originally, yurei just meant souls of the dead, not scary, linked to ancestor veneration memorial services. That's ancient, medieval Japan.
Wow, different.
Then later, especially early modern era, they become these spiteful, vengeful figures we often associate with Japanese ghosts today. The word itself first appears in writing way back in 747.
So it shifted from reverence to fear over time. What about before yurei became scary?
There was the hitodama, this soul orb, round with a tail that could leave the body. Ancestors were protectors, almost like divine spirits, kami, less focused on the corpse itself initially.
But spirits could cause trouble.
If they had earthly resentments, yes. They could become mononoke spirits of unknown dead, causing illness out of spite. Different from Onrai, who caused big disasters.
And they had exorcisms involving yin-yang masters, doctors, priests, and games like Go.
Yeah, the games part is really unique. From the 12th century, maybe the sharp sound of the pieces hitting the board was thought to banish spirits. It's a fascinating, specific cultural practice.
So interesting. And the idea of spirits staying in graves came later, around the 12th century.
Seems so. That led to grave visits, offerings becoming more common. And then around the 15th century, yurei started appearing as these vengeful figures in things like new plays.
Then in the Edo period, there was skepticism, but also a ghost story craze.
Kind of paradoxically, yeah. More skepticism, but also a huge boom in kaidan ghost stories and yurei art. They became entertainment. Terms got mixed up. Yukai, obake. There's even a story of Bosch, the poet, calming a spirit with a poem.
Echoes of Lasky again. And today,
the link between spirit and grave is apparently weakening, more natural burials. But belief in spirits, having powers, connecting with the dead through memorials, that persists. And Ghosts of Dawn Digital, Ring, social media.
The core need to connect seems constant, even as the forms change.
Exactly.
Okay, back to basics. Wikipedia on fear of ghosts. It's widespread, linked to belief in bad ghosts, fear of the dark, and phasmophobia.
Yeah, phasmophobia is specific, persistent phobia, often from childhood stuff, causing real panic attacks.
Even a philosopher, Peter Van Inwagen, admitted having an irrational fear of them despite knowing better.
Speaks volumes about how deep this fear can run, doesn't it? Beyond pure logic. And the entry shows how different cultures frame that fear.
Right, like the Wari in the Amazon fearing cold hands pulling spirits, or Papuans doing loud rituals to make ghosts leave. Very different expressions.
Culture shapes the specifics dramatically.
Which leads nicely into the fear of the unknown from medical news today. That feels central.
Absolutely. Intolerance of uncertainty, anxiety about unpredictable things. Ghosts are kind of the ultimate unknown, aren't they? So it makes sense they trigger this anxiety.
The symptoms sound intense panic, physical reactions, fear of losing control.
Yeah, and while the causes aren't fully known, maybe bad childhood experiences, anxious parents. The point is, it's a recognized anxiety.
And crucially, there are ways to manage it. Therapy, self-help, coping strategies, focusing on what you can control.
Right. Tackling the underlying fear of uncertainty could potentially help with a fear of ghosts, too.
Now, psychology. The Peterhead Prison Museum blog lists cognitive biases behind ghost belief.
This is fascinating. It shows how our own minds can trick us. Things like pattern recognition, seeing faces and shadows, right?
Pareidolia.
Or apophenia, making connections that aren't there. And confirmation bias, only noticing things that fit the haunted idea.
Exactly. Memory distortion is big. Too scary memories get exaggerated over time. And suggestibility, if someone tells you a place is haunted, you're primed to misinterpret things.
Fear and anxiety ramp all this up too. Definitely. And finally, there's the simple human need for meaning, for control. Believing in an afterlife or explaining weird events with ghosts can feel comforting somehow.
So a lot of it comes down to how our brains work, our psychological needs.
It suggests belief is deeply rooted in our psychology, influencing how we perceive reality itself.
Related to this is superstition. The WebMD piece differentiates it.
Yeah, superstition is assigning magical power to a ritual, usually for control or certainty. Think Lucky Charms. It's different from a deep belief in ghosts, but they can overlap like avoiding a haunted crossroads.
It's not necessarily OCD, though they can coexist. And people often know it's not totally rational.
Right. It serves a psychological function, a false sense of certainty. Can sometimes boost confidence, like a placebo.
But downsides, too, phobic superstitions, relying too much on luck.
Demographics suggest older people are less superstitious, maybe women slightly more, perhaps linked to feeling less in control. But it's mostly seen as a normal cultural thing.
A way to manage uncertainty, much like ghost beliefs, can frame the ultimate uncertainty: death.
Good connection.
Okay, last couple of sources. Science Alert on the evolutionary fear of the dark, and Live Science on adults fearing ghosts. Let's link them.
The fear of the dark piece argues it's likely innate. Back when humans had poor night vision, darkness meant danger predators. So that nightly fear was instinctual for survival.
A leftover instinct.
Pretty much. A lingering, foreboding fear to keep us alert. And it's a fear of the unknown, right? Our imagination fills the dark with threats, ancient predators, modern monsters, ghosts.
Horror movies totally exploit that, not showing the monster fully.
Exactly. And even though we're safer now, these traits evolved over millennia. They don't just vanish.
So fear of the dark provides fertile ground for fear of ghosts.
Seems very likely. And the Live Science article suggests fear of ghosts in adults might be more common than we think, maybe underreported due to embarrassment.
Like other phobias, heights, insects.
Yeah. They mention cases where treating depression actually cured a lifelong ghost phobia, suggesting it can function like a specific phobia. And sometimes medication used for phobias helps.
So this fear can be very real, clinically significant for some?
Absolutely. It brings together the evolutionary fear of the unknown dark, our psychology, and sometimes genuine phobic responses.
Right. So pulling it all together, belief in ghosts isn't just one thing, is it?
Not at all. It's this complex weave of imaginative creation, like Lasky talks about, deep-seated biological fear responses managed by the amygdala, all shaped and amplified by our cultural stories, our superstitions, our cognitive biases.
Understanding all those threads gives you a much richer way to think about why ghosts remain so compelling, even if they seem irrational on the surface.
Yeah.
Okay, so that leads us to a final thought for you, the listener. Think about this. We have this evolutionary fear of the dark, this psychological tendency to see patterns and seek meaning. Could it be that our enduring belief in ghosts is just, well, the modern expression of those ancient survival instincts bumping up against the huge unseen landscapes of our own minds and the stories we constantly tell each other?
Hmm. And consider how the types of ghosts we fear or believe in might reflect our specific anxieties today, the cultural narratives of our time.
What new ghosts might emerge as our world, our technology, our understanding keeps changing? Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.